I never wanted to admit that I was tired of change because I wanted to be a good employee.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was, gosh, 8, 10 years ago now. And change and transformation and just flexibility, like adaptability, these are all ways we have to show up at work every day, all day. So I would just love to start off by hearing from you about like this concept of change fatigue and why it's so important that leaders understand the reality of it.
Absolutely.
We're getting right into it
Dig
right
right
away.
in. Well, I think, one of the things that you have to start understanding a context is, as humans, we are curious, and change and novelty is something that we are drawn to as humans. So our natural state is often leaning into what's new and what's novel and innovation. That's when we are happy and balanced, we do want to change. And so when you find yourself in an organization that has really stalled out and you're getting a lot of pushback, and there's just kind of you announce a change that seems like a good idea and the room is kind of just quiet, or off on the side conversations, there's like, oh, not again, that something is out of balance. And, for a lot of organizations, I think there is a couple of things going on. We have kind of a perfect storm happening in terms of what the pandemic did, forcing a bunch of change on a hybrid or
Right.
remote workplace. And, one of the things I like to talk about is something I refer to as change tokens. You really only get so many change tokens to put in the slot with individuals. There's like a limited amount of change that we're able to thoughtfully absorb on top of whatever we consider our day job. And I feel like, we've got leaders who are kind of trying to keep spending those change tokens, and they're not transacting. It's not working because there's just such a high volume.
Right.
Gartner found that in 2022, the average employee faced 10 enterprise change initiatives, up from 2 in 2016. So that's a
Holy.
tenfold increase in 8 years. And these are, when you say enterprise change, it's often not like new products and services. It's much more like a new communication system, a different way of collaborating, a new file
Right.
storage structure, a project management tool, these sort of improvements around the work. And I think a lot of teams are just done, at least in the short term.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I remember some of that happening before I left the corporate world, and it was like, whoa, wait a sec, we have to learn how to do Workday. I'm just so used to like picking up and calling my HRBP. And so there's this whole thing about cognitive load and then trying to change our own patterns. So, like, what are sort of some signs of this change fatigue? I mean, you had mentioned just now that if people don't get excited, what might be some other signs that leaders could look for?
Yeah, I think some of the most obvious ones are sort of either silence or active resistance. And, depending on the organization, it can be either one of those. But, if you're like, hey, guess what? We're going to switch to a thing, and there's grumbling and there's side conversations and there's talking to the management about, why do we have to do this? I'm like, is this really necessary? Those are the ones that are sort of obvious to spot. But one of the most insidious facts about change fatigue is, especially in knowledge work, it's really hard to see. It's often tucked away. To your point at the top of the call, you didn't want to look like the person who wasn't into
Right.
change. So in a lot of cases, you get an announcement at all hands that we're going to do a thing. And there's a lot of like smiling and nodding. And even if you ask people, they'll say, yeah, that sounds like a great idea.
Yeah.
But then you pull together the cross-functional team and it's like, oh, well, we couldn't meet for 3 weeks because Joe was out. And, there's a lot of kicking the can down the road, stalling, slow playing, deprioritizing,
Right.
plausible deniability. All of that tends to be a symptom that the idea hasn't fully got the buy-in it needs to overcome whatever inertia or change fatigue might be there.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, how much space do we really have in our day for change?
Yeah.
Like, is there change? I'm trying to think of a fun little word, but like, there's change overwhelm. Like, when do we stop with the change? And maybe that's not even the right word. Do you know what I'm saying,
Yeah.
though?
Well, and I think part of the problem is our obsession with productivity has
Yes.
absolutely hampered our ability to innovate, because when you are insisting that your employees are fully utilized every single minute of the workday and that everything is as efficient as it can be, there are no gaps for change.
Right.
And so, unless you have a team that's sitting around a day a week, they don't have 20% of their time to add to a change initiative. Not only that, I think a lot of leaders tend to think of change in terms of the rational project management Gantt chart type
Yeah.
change. Like we need to evaluate this, and then we need to RFP that, and then it will take this long to do training. But there's processing time in there.
Yeah.
There's time for us to change our patterns. There's, just being able to accept new things takes time. And I think a lot of leaders don't have any clear concept, A, of what their employees are doing on a day in and day out basis, and B, how much time it will take for a particular change initiative to be fully internalized. I think if you're
Right.
underestimating both of those is where you get in this mess.